All right, so the directions said to graph by identifying the end behavior, the zeros, the multiplicity, the y-intercept, and the additional points that you might need. Okay, a lot of that graph here. So the end behavior, because the highest exponent is odd and the number on front is positive, this means it points up to the right, or falls left and rises right. So that's the only thing I would say if you're going to put it into words. Falls left, rises right. Okay. Also, this time it was in order from highest exponent down to none. Don't let that trick you. Okay. Don't let that be the reason you get this question wrong. Make sure you look at them and make sure that it's in order highest degree down to none. Okay, sometimes your book tries to trick you. Sometimes I try to trick you. I'm giving you a heads up right now. That has to always be the first step. Look at it. Make sure it's highest degree down to none. Okay, so in this case, again, highest degree was 3, which is odd. Number on front is positive, which means it rises to the right, falls to the left. Okay, that was the first thing you identify. Then find the zeros in the multiplicity. So she took the f of x, replaced it with 0, set this equal to 0. Okay, factored out the x because there was a greatest common factor. She could have even factored out a 2x. You would have gotten the same answer. Okay, so those of you that maybe factored out a 2x, that works too. If you factor out just the x, then you're factoring 2x squared minus 4x minus 16, which factored in a 2x plus 4 and x minus 4. And then set each of these equal to 0. So this one gets a 0, this one gets a 0, and this one gets a 0. And you get the first 0, which is 0, 0. Okay, the second one, which is -2, and the third one, which is 4. If you're listing them as x-intercepts, I want you to give them to me like that, as point value. But if you're listing them as zeros, okay, you can just write them as 0, what was it, -2? Yep, -2 and 4, like that, okay? Zeros are going to be in a list format like that. Intercepts, point value, x, y. Zeros, just a list of all the x values, okay? And then because none of them occurred more than once, the multiplicity on each of them is 1, which means it's odd. It's going to cross through those points on your x-axis. Questions so far? Everybody pretty much got to there, but...
Did you determine the end behavior?
The end behavior goes highest exponent. So if it's even or odd, right? So you're looking at the highest exponent. This time it's 3. That's odd, which means one's going up and one's going down. To figure out that, you look at the number on the front. If it's positive, it goes up, right, and down, left, just like your normal x cubed. If it's negative, other way around, up, left, down, right. And then if the highest exponent is even, they're both up or they're both down. Positive, both up, negative, both down. Okay, y-intercept, she already found it because it was a 0, but if not, you would plug 0 in for x, solve, and you get the y-intercept, which is 0, 0 in this case. And then she probably, I'm assuming, went to go graph it. So she got the -2, she got the 0, and she got the +4. She knew the arrow went down, left, and up, right. And she knew it crossed through here and crossed through and crossed through. The question is, how high did she have to go and how low? And that's where you have to plot additional points. I need you to give me at least 1 point from in between the zeros. So when you go to graph this on your quiz tomorrow, you make sure that you get at least 1 point in between each pair of zeros. If that point's the y-intercept, awesome. That's one less thing you have to graph or plug in, okay? But in this case, my y-intercept was a 0, so it wasn't any additional help. So she took -1, plugged it in, and got -10, and then she took +2, plugged it in, and got -32. I would say pick something in between the middle of those 2 points, okay, which 2 is perfect. It's directly in between. If it's a fraction, try to avoid it. Pick the whole number that's around there, okay? Sometimes you can't avoid it. If your points are at, -1 and 0, you're going to have to plug in a fraction. But other than that, you can plug in the whole numbers, make your life a little bit easier. And then, I said it last week, but I don't need you to go -32 tick marks on your graph, okay? Just go down, plot your point, and then label it like she did so that I know that this is supposed to be to -32. And this is supposed to be 0, 10. Or, sorry, -1, 10. Alex?
How do you know if it touches or if it goes?
If it's an odd multiplicity or even multiplicity. So if your root occurs an odd number of times, if you have an x that repeats but it's odd, then it crosses through. If you have an x that repeats but it's an even number of times it repeats, so it's 2 times or 4 times or 6 times, it bounces.
And it crosses through both?
Crosses, what do you mean both?
Through all 3, so it has...
So this one crossed through all 3 because each of those only happened once. All of your zeros only happened once. So it went up, down, and up again. If you get your multiplicity and your end behavior and it doesn't make sense, like that should be a catch. Something's wrong. Either your multiplicity is wrong or your end behavior is wrong. Because if you had to bounce to get to the next point and you couldn't, then you know something's wrong. On the homework, I'll say this. The last couple of problems, I think it was the 2 problems. So those will not be on your quiz. We didn't get to those in the notes on Friday. I'm going to cover them tomorrow after the quiz. So they will be on your test, but they're not on your quiz. If you didn't get those wrong, don't panic, okay? The last 2 ones where it gave you like the roots, right? It said like 0 and 4 and 2 or something like that, where the roots find the equation. I'm going to walk you through that process tomorrow, okay? After the quiz. So it will be on your test, but it is not on your quiz. Don't panic about those. And if you got them wrong on the homework, don't worry. I'll give you back those points, okay? Yep.
Mine was number 7. It was y is equal to 1/4 x cubed, and then parentheses x squared minus 64.
Number 7, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. And it was end behavior or full on graph it, right?
I think it was graphic.
Okay. So the first one is already like that 1/4 x cubed. I can't do anything with, but I can factor that. That's the difference of 2 squares. So 1/4 x cubed, x plus 8 and x minus 8 is as far as I can go as far as factoring. So then I would set each of these equal to 0. This equal to 0, this equal to 0, and this equal to 0. So if I'm here, if 0 equals 1/4 x to the third, I would multiply everything by 4 to get rid of that 1/4. And I get 0 equals x to the third. And then I would cube root both sides. And when you cube root, technically it's plus or minus, but there's 3, cube root, not plus or minus. It would just be the cube root of 0. But there are 3 x's there, which means my root is 0, but the multiplicity is 3. Because it is x times x times x equals 0. So each of those individual x's gets a 0. And then this would be x equals -8, and this would be x equals +8, and both the multiplicities there are just 1. So my zeros are -8, 0 with a multiplicity of 3, and +8, which tells you it crosses through all 3 of those places. You're welcome. Yep.
It was my number 6, and it was 5x squared minus 20x minus 5, and then that's one.
Minus 20x minus 5. Like that?
Mm-hmm.
And what was the instructions?
It's find the zeros, and
Okay.
that's when I have to complete the square to figure it out.
You had to? Oh, okay. All right, so for this one, so I would set this equal to 0, and then I would take out a 5, because that's the greatest common factor, x squared minus 4x minus 1 equals 0, okay? So this is not factorable. Your quiz tomorrow is going to be factorable, at least the regular one. I'm not sure, I haven't gotten to the makeup yet. The stuff for tomorrow is at least factorable. You will eventually have to do quadratic formula, so I'm going to teach you, I'm going to remind you how to do it here, okay? So if I get to something, and you can use quadratic formula on any quadratic. So if you're horrible at factoring, but you can plug into the quadratic formula, go for it. Do it that way, okay? So the quadratic formula, as a reminder, is -b plus and minus, the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. There's a video on the iTunes U course where they sing it to Pop the Weasel, just in case you ever really want to get like it in your head. I won't do that to you. You're welcome. Singing is not my strong suit, but it's there. This is a super important formula that never, ever, ever goes away as far as math goes, okay? And standardized tests assume you know it, so it's always good to review it. So I'm going to solve what's in here using that. So my A is what's in front of the x squared, which is 1. The B is what's in front of the 4, which is -4. And the C is what's by itself, which is -1. And then I take and plug it in. So -4 plus and minus the square root of -4 squared minus 4 minus A minus C all over 2 times A. So I get +4 plus and minus the square root of 16. This is -4 times a -1, which is a +4, all over 2. I get 4 plus and minus the square root of 20 over 2. 20 is not a perfect square, but if you break it down, you can reduce it. So there are 2 2's, which means 1 goes to the outside of the root, 1, and the 5 stays underneath. And then 2 goes into both 4 and 2. So this is 2 plus and minus root 5. Which means your zeros are 2 plus root 5 and 2 minus root 5. Yep. For tomorrow, no, but you're definitely going to see quadratic come back into play. Yeah. The great thing about it is that, like I said, if you're not great at factoring, you can use that to solve. So even if it was factorable, you can still use quadratic to solve. Anything that's got an x squared set equal to 0, you can use the quadratic formula to solve. So those of you that like struggle with factoring, especially when there's like a number on the front, this is your like a secondary tool that can help you get to your answer. What would happen is if it was factorable, this number would be a perfect square and you'd be able to square root it and continue to go further. The other thing I want to mention is this 5 on the front. So if I had divided, I could have got rid of it 2 ways. I could have divided both sides by 5 and I would have canceled out. Or when I go to solve this, there's no way to make 5 0. So I don't have to worry about adding that root on. If it was a 5x, now I have to worry about it. Now my other root would be 0. Okay, but...
So you don't have a root of 0 anymore? Because 5...
Correct, because 5 by itself can't be 0. So if I had taken out, if it was like x cubed on all of those and I took out a 5x, then you'd have x equals 0 and the other ones. This is on Canvas. So this is what's on Canvas as your quiz review. This is there and also the solutions to it, but I want to go through a couple of things right here. So one, and this is pretty similar to the process, the flow of your quiz as well. In the beginning, you are going to have to complete the square. So directions like write the quadratic in standard form means complete the square. So these are your kind that are going to be complete the square. And I've warned you again and again, but I'll do it again. They're not going to be pretty numbers. You're going to get something in the front of the x squared that you're going to have to take out. It could be positive, it could be negative, it could be a whole number. You're going to have to take it out, okay? So that whole process, and I just uploaded an extra complete the square video on the YouTube channel if you need it, with 3 in which they are not one on the front. One's got a negative, one's got a positive number, one's got a negative number.
The number that you add to the last term that you take out is the number that you add to the middle, but subtracted multiplied by the number in the front.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And if I need to do an example of that when I get to the end, I'll do another example. Okay, you guys, let's let me know. All right, so again, you'll have to complete the square. You'll have to get it into standard form. Then for 3 and 4, now you've got a quadratic, which is your parabola, in which you can graph however you want. So you can either force these into complete the square, or you can do negative b over 2a. How you figure that out is totally up to you. So remember your vertex is hk. Again, you can get it into complete the square like we did with the first one. And then figure out your vertex from there. Or you can do h equals negative b over 2a and then plug that back in to get the k. That's totally your preference. Your axis of symmetry is x equals h. Don't forget your x equals. You will lose points. It is a line. It is not a point. Your x-intercepts and y-intercepts, hopefully we're pros by now. The x-intercepts you're going to take by plugging 0 in for y. And the y-intercept you're going to get by plugging 0 in for x. And you're going to give these to me as coordinate points. So the intercepts are coordinate points. Domain and range. I'm going to give you the answer to one of the questions on your quiz. Are you ready for it? Domain of a parabola is negative infinity to positive infinity. Always. Don't say I never give you anything. Okay? If you get that question wrong tomorrow, I should be able to like smack you with your own iPad. Somebody's going to do it. And we're going to have this conversation. I'm going to be super embarrassed. I won't do it in front of everybody. But domain of a parabola is negative infinity to positive infinity. right? My arrows go left and right. Whether they point up or they point down, they always go left and right. They would continue to get it smaller and they would continue to get larger, okay? The range is what varies. So the range, if my parabola opens upward, is going to be the k coordinate of my vertex to positive infinity. The lowest point, which is going to be the k, up to positive infinity. And if it opens downward, it's the other way around, negative infinity to k. And that k gets a bracket because those are solid points. Questions so far? Okay, and then the last one before you graph it would be max and min. So your max occurs if the parabola opens downward, and the min occurs if the parabola opens upward, and both of them are just k. The single number, fraction, whatever it is, okay, that is k. That is your max or min. You will not give it to me in point format. And then you'll graph it. And if you're lucky, your vertex and your intercepts are enough points to graph it. As long as you have your vertex and 1 point left and 1 point right, that's good for me, okay? Just make sure that if you don't have enough, that you plot some additional points. And again, numbers here are not always going to be pretty. You're going to get fractions. You want to keep them as simplified fractions, okay? Don't ever leave something that's unsimplified. And if you want to convert it to mixed numbers so you can graph it easily, go ahead and do that. Questions on either of those? So again, answers are posted on these, but I want you to try them. I don't want to walk you through them individually. Okay, the next one was still from 2(1), which is the standard form of an equation. So this is where you need y equals a times x minus h squared. Don't forget the squared plus k. These should be super easy. All you're doing is plugging in the vertex as your h and your k, and the point as your x and your y. You'll solve for a, and then you'll take just the a, the h, and the k, and you'll plug it back in. Don't forget the squared, and don't switch your vertex and your point. The vertex has to be the hk. The point has to be the xy. Questions on that one? All right, and then 6 and 7 are just like our warm-up was. So the end behavior, remember if it's x is even, if it's raised to an even power, and it's positive, they both are pointing up. I should write it out in words so that you do. Both up. If x is raised to an even power and it's negative, both point down. If x is raised to an odd power and positive, then it falls left, rises right. And if it's a negative and an odd power, then it rises left and falls right. So for those, you always look at the highest exponent, not necessarily the first one. To find the zeros, you're going to set f of x equal to 0. Factor it however you need to factor it. Sometimes it's going to be 3 terms you can factor it. Sometimes you're going to have to take out a greatest common factor. Sometimes it's the difference of 2 squares. Sometimes it's 4 terms. Be prepared for all the different types of factoring there. If the multiplicity occurs an even number of times, so if the root occurs an even number of times, it's going to bounce. If it's odd, it's going to cross through. The y-intercept, you're going to plug 0 in for x. And then you can use those points and any additional points you need to graph. So there's 2 examples here for you to make sure that you can do. So technically, if you count like 1, 2, 3, there's only 4 questions on this test. On this quiz, okay? but they have such multiple parts to them that they're going to get broken down. So it's, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Complete the square. We're going to force a complete square. One where you're going to do the quadratic, where it's broken down into vertex, axis, domain and range, all that stuff, okay? And then graphing. So that one's got multiple parts. It's going to count for multiple points. Then the equation, which probably has the least amount of weight. And then the last one is like this, where it gets broken down into its multiple parts. And you'll see it. I literally wrote right on there like how many points it is overall for each question. Just be really careful, because half of it, like, if you get the vertex wrong on your parabola on the front, and then you carry that down into your axis symmetry and your range and your, all that stuff, max, min, all of it's going to get impacted. So be really, really careful. Questions for me? What do you need from me to be successful for tomorrow? Yes?
With end behavior, like when it's an even exponent and it's plus or minus, how would you say, like, is it rise left, rise right? Like, what is the wording for those?
You can either write both up and both down, or you could both rises left and right, falls left and right.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be okay.
Yep. Yep, so you can give me multiplicity just with your little circles. So if there's no circle, I'm assuming it only occurred once. If there's a little circle with a number, then you would tell me how many times it occurs. So if you're writing out your zeros and you get a, like 0, -2, and 4, and 4 occurs twice, you would circle it just like that. You're good? Yes?